Hey there, this is James Wilson with MTB Strength Training Systems and BikeJames.com. Today I want to share a really cool movement tip to help you with your cornering. Now, cornering is one of the most complex movements that we got to do on our bike. It's one of the hardest ones for us to master. And the reason for that is because it requires us to learn how to move our hips laterally, which is, it's not a movement that a lot of people naturally have. And so we really got to make sure that we can train it and learn how to do it better. So what I want to do in this video is show you how internally and externally rotating at the hip is really one of the keys to proper cornering technique, and then show you how some of the exercises that I've talked about, like the stick windmill and the kettlebell windmill, about how those exercises help you train this specific movement. So real quick, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, when you're cornering your bike, you want to focus on leaning the bike more than turning the handlebars. You don't steer by turning the handlebars. You want to make sure that you're steering by having creating a balance between the bike leaning over and your center of gravity moving out to compensate for that. When everything's lined up, when your center of gravity, which is roughly around your hips, and the bike center of gravity, which is roughly around the bottom bracket or on top of each other, then everything is great, you're balanced. But as you start to corner, if you lean the bike inside of the corner, which is what you should do, then if you don't compensate by leaning your hips out, then what you're going to end up with is too much weight to the inside, which is going to be unbalanced, result in feeling like you're going to crash, not being able to maintain good position through the corner. So one of the keys to cornering is being able to use your hips and move them laterally to keep that balance as the bike is leaning over. So when you're looking at it, again, if I'm standing on my bike, got my feet set here, I'm down in my attack position. That's why when you watch good riders who really know how to corner, you'll see their hips getting busy. You'll see their hips swinging out to the side and really like driving them through the corners. You know, you watch an average rider and their hips are dead, you know. It's not a matter of like trying to turn your belly button where you want to go. It's a matter of getting those hips out to the side. When you do that, it'll point your belly button where it wants to go. But if your hips are just kind of dead on top of your bike and you're not getting them moving out laterally, then that's going to really make it difficult for you to stay balanced and use good cornering technique. So one of the keys to that, like I mentioned earlier, is the internal and external rotation at the hip that happens. So you'll see if I'm in a good hip hinge position, okay, I got my hips hinged back, butt back, my chest is down. Again, if I was on my bike, this would be a good attack position on the bike. I'm set up, getting ready to go into a corner. If I want to get my hips to move to the side, without compromising my posture, without having to use my lower back or something like that to create the movement, then I have to rely on this internal and external rotation at the hip. So again, I'm down in this position here. If I want my hips to swing out to the side there, then I internally rotate at the hip, and that's going to cause my hips to swing out. Again, if I was standing up and my foot wasn't planted to the ground, I would be doing this. My foot would be turning to the inside. But because my foot's planted and my foot can't move, something has to move, so my hips move. It swings my hips out to the side. Now, same thing, I can internally rotate my hips, which will bring my hips back to center. So again, this movement right here and being able to apply that in that position is the key to that lateral movement. Again, I'm down here. I got to internally and externally rotate the hips in order to get the hips to move. Now, I focus on the rear leg. This is one of the reasons, I get too far off subject, why I talk about the need to be able to ride switch foot so that you can enter a corner with your inside foot forward, because it's also going to set up this internal and external rotation. You're going to be able to drive your internal and external rotation and the hip move with that from the trail leg more effectively. And so if I have this as my rear leg, then I'm going to be able to move my hips out to that side optimally. It's going to be a little bit tougher for me to move them that way. And so again, that's why being able to get the proper foot forward is important, because it helps set that up. But so I focus on the rear leg when I'm talking about internal and external rotation. Even though the front leg is obviously doing some work as well, you'll feel that it's the rear leg that's really like driving the movement there. And so again, that's pretty much it. Being able to apply that on the bike is really important. Now again, one of the problems is we go into riding and we have dysfunctions. We're locked up in the hips. We just have mobility issues. We literally can't get in that position without all sorts of twisting and turning. And then once we do that, we need to know how to be able to use it with some strength, because again, there's a big difference between just kind of like getting in position and you know, trying to stay, you know, neutral and balanced on top of the bike, and actually actively driving yourself through a corner. If you ever hear of someone talking about pumping themselves through a corner, out of a corner, this is what they're talking about. They're literally winding their hips, okay? So you'll see, again, another characteristic of a good rider, you'll see when they go into a corner, they're winding those hips up. You'll see their inside knee actually like dropping in. They're not pushing their knee in, they're winding their hips up, which is resulting in that knee coming in closer to their top tube. And then when they're ready to, when they hit the point where they can start to unwind, they're able to actively drive through their leg, rotate the hip, and then drive themselves through, and that creates some momentum. So again, once you get this feeling, you'll get a completely different idea of how to be able to create and maintain momentum going through corners using this technique. So again, let me show you a couple things that'll help you with that. The stick windmill is a great exercise. I have a video going into this in more depth, but I'll show this real quick and just show you how this is working that same thing. So again, I got my stick on my back. I'm going to get my feet set. Again, I don't step quite as far forward as I would with when I'm cornering or, you know, on my bike, but for this exercise, I just want to step forward a little bit. Now, for all intents and purposes, this is my trail leg. So I've got to weight this leg a little bit. Now, for me to come down into this position here, I'm having to create that internal rotation at the hip in order to come down. And then again, to come back up, I have to create that external rotation at the hip. So this exercise here is really working on that hip mobility, the mobility aspect of that internal and external rotation as it applies to all the other body movement that we need for cornering. And then again, you can see with the exercise, the kettlebell windmill, again, get set up. For all intents and purposes, this is my trail leg back here. So as I come down, again, same thing. I'm having to rotate through the hip as I hinge the hip back, and then rotate through it again to bring myself back up. So it's that hinging with the rotation through the hip that makes the stick windmill and the kettlebell windmill variation so great for us in trying to learn how to corner better on our bike. And again, if you have trouble with this internal and external rotation, if you're locked up through the hips that way, you're never going to be able to corner the way that you should. And so you got to address those issues first before you start worrying too much about your cornering technique. But once you unlock all this stuff here, a lot of that cornering technique just kind of starts to naturally fall in place. It's kind of funny how proper movement leads to easier skill acquisition. So again, I hope you guys have enjoyed this tip. Again, a little off the beaten path there, but again, these little details, this ability to internally and externally rotate the hips and be able to apply that on the bike, again, can really help you, but you just got to make sure that you have something in your training program that's addressing those issues, or else you're going to have a gap that's going to hold you back. So once again, this has been James Wilson with MTB Strength Training Systems. You can check me out on the web at bikejames.com. Hope you've enjoyed this tip, and I'll talk to you in the next one.